Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for our webinar. What are information security controls and how do they reduce cyber risks? I'm Khaled and I will be your host for the day. Our speaker for the session, Mr. Alexander Howarth, Chief Information Security Officer and Data Protection Officer at B Cryptics AG. Please note that the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for about 40 minutes, out of which last 30 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Should you need any assistance during the webinar, please use the chat box. Also do note we have two criteria for certification. First, participants need to attend the complete webinar. Second, fill in the survey and the right answers to all the three questions based on the webinar, which will be sent to you one day post the session. Now about our speaker. Alexander has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity and IT risk management in building and sustaining pragmatic global corporate cybersecurity programs. He is able to set strategic direction on IT security and provide leadership and oversight of data breach issues. As an executive leader of an IT risk management, Alexander implemented customized policy framework, compliance plans, incident handling, third-party management, awareness campaigns and trainings, and risk mitigation tools. Based on his flair for new technologies and excessive IT expertise, he understands the need for cybersecurity in the process of the digital transformation. As a communicator, Alexander successfully shares both experience and know-how with all the involved stakeholders. Now I will hand over the section to you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you, Khaled. Well, also from my part, very warm welcome to this Cyber Talk webinar. Well, then let's jump in. I hope you can all see my slides. So as Khaled already said, topic today is what are information security controls and how do they reduce cyber risks? I mean, it's quite a broad topic, and yeah, I hear also a lot about it, and there are also a lot of changes, but we will get to that just in a second. So let's jump in. So first of all, we have to do some definition work, I guess, before we actually talking about information security controls. Otherwise, it's a bit of broad theme, and a lot of people understand sometimes slightly some differences. So basically, information security controls are definitely safeguards or countermeasures implemented to minimize, detect, avoid, or counteract information security risks, including data theft, information system breaches, and unauthorized access. So, I mean, that's just some examples, so it's not the finishing list. And these security controls help protecting the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of data and networks. So the famous CIA triad, I'm sure some of you are also familiar with that. Well, it's always very important that all data we have, and obviously also the networks, are very well protected to assure integrity, availability, and confidentiality, mainly actually of our data. So it's often actually going towards those three terms. So if we go further, so what are actually information security controls? I mean, it's a bit similar what we just saw in the definition, obviously, otherwise we would have a big discrepancy, which wouldn't be good. But basically, these are measures taken to reduce information security risks. So once you set up controls, I mean, once they're also working, yeah, well, the risk in terms of either getting attacked or to face a breach, they should definitely reduce. So that should be the main goal. Obviously, you want to protect, as I already said, the CIA triad. So basically, your crown jewels, and more and more that's mainly your data you're using. And yeah, so for a lot of questions I get or ask in the beginning. So how do I find out which controls are important for us? And that's normally typically done by a risk assessment, and we'll come to that later. And those risk assessments normally, well, shouldn't. You can create your own controls if you want to, but I strongly well would recommend that you use any kinds of security standards. So the most common ones are, I guess, NIST or ISO. So if you use NIST, there are roughly about 100 controls. If you use ISO 27000, there are 114 controls. Um, Again, even if you, well, maybe now you get a bit shocked about the numbers, but you have to read carefully through the full standard, which means, I mean, there are some areas maybe which are not relevant to you, because let's say if you're not using any kind of wireless network, because you're a bit used to more the physical cable, well then the whole wireless section won't be applicable for you. So and then you will definitely have less than 114. And well, once you actually want to get certified also towards that kind of standard, you normally also start with a statement of applicability, which means you are actually picking all the controls which you really want to have and which also will be certified or assessed. So this document is very important. So you really clearly state which controls you want and which ones you don't want. So that's also important to know. So yeah, so that's basically how you start. So you basically first you do your risk assessment, hopefully also using a standard. If you go to the next slide, you can slowly also a bit see how this works. So risk assessment normally, as I said already before, is this process used to identify and evaluate risks and its potential effects. Obviously, if we look at the picture below of this slide, you can see that there's a vulnerability identification. Obviously, that's always good if you do this before an attacker actually finds your vulnerabilities. But this can either be done on a technical level or on a more manual level, or even by an external. Let's say if you also do penetration testing, they normally also find a couple of vulnerabilities, and obviously will then also do a results analysis, and based on that they will actually hand over the kind of risk assessment documentation telling you which ones are major, minor, or kind of in the middle. And obviously then it's up to the company to do the remediation work and to implement them as well. So either you have a IT security or IT well-equipped IT team who can actually do the remediation themselves. Sometimes some recommendations are also to buy any kind of security software. So anyhow, you have to do some evaluation, or you will need some help from a third party, or you will get some external help anyhow, because you don't have a dedicated cybersecurity specialist, so they can actually implement it for you as well. So yeah, so this is really important that you do this risk assessment to also get a kind of a feeling how well you actually structured. I also get a lot of questions asking me, so how should we start with the total risk assessment? And normally it's really and a lot of are afraid that they're very weak, but I mean at one point you have to start, and you that's basically your baseline, and starting from that you building kind of with a gap analysis all the you also find out where you should actually invest most, because I mean if you want to implement controls and you have some domains which are really not very well so far set up, like let's say business continuity management, uh, or incident handling management, then you should maybe also start with them. It will also show you which domains are actually take longer. You can also do a kind of better roadmap or a whole how you want to implement it. And I mean, in terms of if you also have to implement a lot of external, as I said before, either hardware or software, yeah, it will also give you a better timeline how to handle it. And also, if you have to present it to your board or to C-level, it's also nice. You can also show them how much it will cost and how long it will take. So those things are also well, not to, you should also keep it in mind before, well, you start implementing. Good. So, what are actually the types of information security controls? Well, normally you hear a lot of those three, so preventive, detective, and corrective security controls. Yeah, well, some are kind of more clear than others. We will then, well, in a couple of minutes also look at the kind of overview where you will actually see the types and forms. Whereas I really want to show you, well, in a more practical way, what how what can controls be in terms of, and also matching it, so kind of a matrix how these things works together. So if we look at the first one, preventive security controls, well, this is kind of the normal stuff, or let's say, yeah, just everybody wants to prevent. So this is normally designed to protect cybersecurity incidents. But this is kind of, well, not really rocket science. That's what normally you would do without, well, bigger efforts, I would say. I mean, everybody wants to, well, is closing his normally closing his door when he's leaving his house or his flat. You close it with your key, and well, that's why I'm saying it's kind of also preventing a normal thing to do. So if you leave it open, well, yeah, then if you did it, personal's a big breach by not closing your door. The second point is the detective security control. So this is already a little bit more, sometimes also tricky, but with technical help, you can also do a lot of things, like actually also set up honeypots for intruders. Uh, so you basically see when they're working, so you caught them in flagranti, so that would mean, yeah, they're still, well, actually breaching your network, and but you already found that, well, somebody's tried to, well, get into your honeypot, but obviously you set it up just to find, well, these intruders, and so you really see what they're doing, which is kind of nice if you also want to um, see what they would steal, um, and you can also trace them back. You have a better audit log. You can obviously also, well, do some research during this incident. But well, yeah, it's, as I said, it's a tricky thing. You really need a really strong cybersecurity because, well, they could already be also in your network doing other stuff. So that's why detective security controls are more tricky. And then obviously corrective security controls. This is obviously a lot to do with, well, resilience. So I mean, if you have like you're doing some backups, if you have good backup history, obviously if you well will be hit by a ransomware attack, you're very well structured, because I mean, even if they encrypt your whole data, if you have a good backup, you can restore your data, let's say in a half day, in a day, and you're up and running. So the damage you will have is not that big, so to say. So that would be a corrective security control. Nevertheless, hopefully you will also do others homework and clean up, and so that you won't get hit by ransomware again. So, but that would be an example for a corrective security control. If we look now at the forms of information security controls, here we have basically four types: access and physical controls, procedural controls, technical controls, and compliance controls. So yeah, also to give you some examples, obviously physical controls is quite, well, that changed also a lot lately, because obviously a lot of us are sitting now at home, so it's not like in the, well, a year ago where everybody was actually sitting at his desk, I guess, at a company, and that company obviously you could also guard, well, by either a guard in front or having somebody at the front desk looking who is entering and leaving the building. Obviously, you had more kind of also physical security in terms of you needed a badge to enter. Maybe you also had access to a couple of floors, not the whole building, and so on. You had perimeter fences, and so on. So at home, normally things are, well, not that much locked up, and yes, if you have other things to look at. That's why I'm saying a lot of things also change a bit. Procedural controls, and this is also a big part or an important part, because, well, I always say, I mean, the weakest links normally is unfortunately still human factor. So as long as well, you definitely need to do also security awareness education for your employees. Also here, a lot of things changed because we do a lot of remote work nowadays. So you did definitely also have to show them what threats are out there when you're using your maybe also own machine or well, your hopefully also VPN access and so on. So, and they obviously also have to protect their endpoint. So those are new things which, well, the employees have to face. And I would also say what shouldn't be also forgotten is that unfortunately we can't um, um, well, the communication is also important. So which means you're before you were sitting very close to your IT department, and now obviously well, you're sitting alone at home. So things also get a little bit more either complicated or take longer. Which means if you need any IT help, I mean maybe you still have an IT operator somewhere. But I mean, if you need new hardware, it will also take longer to actually get it because before in the company, you could just either go up to your IT department that they could give it to you directly, and now maybe they even have to ship it. So it's also a thing which is changing. Technical controls, that's also very important. Obviously, there are also a lot of technical things which are helping, like the multi-factor authentication. Always use it if it's possible. Um, Obviously, other things are kind of standard, hopefully. Antivirus or firewalls. Well, I've also been to a couple of clients, and I didn't even find antivirus on their Macs, or because they were convinced that Macs are very secure. So yeah, so unfortunately, there's still a lot to do, and also, well, it's good to have a technical, well, controlled and also protection, but nevertheless, it's still somebody also has to control it. I also once was at the client side and where they used actually metal detectors when you entered the building. And yeah, first day I entered there, I also took off everything I had on me, I guess, and put it in the basket and passed. And the next day I went to that client. I saw that a lot of employees just walked through, and actually there was nobody holding them off. So that that's just an example also from actually that you have a control, even a technical control, but if you don't implement it right, well, there's no use having that control. So it's also important for those forms of security controls that once you set them up, obviously also somebody has to look that they're also working. And that brings you to the last point, the compliance control. Obviously, if you have well, they should also look at privacy laws, or as I said before, cybersecurity frameworks. Maybe you also have internal compliance controls. So that's also important that they are, well, that you have a couple of controls towards compliance. I mean, there's also terms of sea level. If you actually want to go for ISO 27001 certification, every year sea level has actually to look at the internal policies or IT policies and also sign them off. So that's a huge thing, which some companies will neglect a little bit to do. Um, but if you take it seriously, everybody is responsible, and even also sea level should also know their task and responsibilities, and also well do that. Okay, so that brings me to this matrix or table where I try to bring those the types and the forms together. So if we look at the first one, the preventive and the access physical controls, as you can see that obviously, well, how could you prevent that somebody enters your building or your flat? Well, use fences, gates, locks, or nowadays even biometrics. So, well, people will, it will be harder for intruders actually to get in. If we stay in this form and look at the detective controls, obviously you can use surveillance cameras, which means even if somebody is actually doing or robbing your house, you have it on camera, or you could see it in real time. So that's more the detective control. And then obviously corrective if well, your fences are obviously, well, damaged, you should definitely repair them. And for buildings or enterprise buildings, you obviously can reissue access cards. So that also happened once at also a client of mine. There was a hotel who where well intruders actually also well terminated basically their card issuing machine. So basically, well nobody could well use their access cards anymore. So basically, they had to go in with their physical keys. Obviously, the hotel still had physical keys, but you can imagine if you have 400 guests and I don't know in 300 rooms, yeah, you need a lot of stuff to actually open all the doors. So and well, if we continue to procedural controls, preventive types, obviously, well, one of my favorites, awareness campaigns. Well, here again, well, it's very important, and I know some have already kind of a fatigue, but the good thing is a lot of well threats are not just um, concerning us in our professional life, but also personal life. So I guess people are more and more aware about cybersecurity, but nevertheless, you have really to tell them what to do and what they shouldn't do, especially if you're doing any kind of phishing campaigns, but also using the latest webinars to show them the newest threats, and if possible, also to customize those campaigns, not just do it always for everybody, but maybe also for your back office, maybe also for your C level. Or even for your IT developers, so that makes well it also more fun to them because normally, well, depending on the size of your company, a couple of well employees are obviously more aware than others, and they will be bored if they have to do the standard cybersecurity training. So normally developers they know quite a lot about it, and you should also tell them what they should look at. Another preventive is obviously business continuity plan testing. So if you already have one, it's already good. But if you never tested it, it's not well. It can well it can fire kind of backwards because well obviously if you have to run the testing basically in a real case scenario, yeah, a lot of time and precious time could be gone. So I always also recommend to test the business continuity plan because I guess version one is normally not your last version, and once you did some testing, you will find a lot of things you can well actually improve. Normally, also I also recommend to do any kind of checklists, which you will also only know or once you actually did the testing. So because well, in an emergency situation, you don't want to read the whole continuity plan anyhow, but checklists are normally the best thing to do. Then the detective, well, procedural controls obviously are simulated phishing attacks. That is really a nice thing to do, which I also like to do. Setting up obviously well fake phishing emails to check if your well your employees are actually they know what's happening. Here again, it's also recommended not to send well one phishing email to everybody at the same time because that's way too obvious. Well, okay, nowadays when we do remote work, obviously it's not that easy as well. But before when everybody was sitting next to each other, and you're sending simultaneous phishing email or exactly the similar one at the same time. Obviously, the first one will see it, maybe click on it, and the second one will already know from the other that this was a phishing. So it's really good to have actually a kind of uh, well use something where you can actually send um, individual attacks and also different emails. So that's really better. That's makes things more difficult, obviously, for the employees. It's also not your goal is not just to do finger pointing and tell everybody, well, you clicked on it, but at the end of the day, you want to make it as realistic as it is. And well, if somebody actually clicks on the link, it's better to click it during a simulated attack than in a real case scenario. CM is obviously also a detective control where events obviously are locked and managed. Um, and if you go further to the corrective procedural controls, obviously setting up an automated incident response process is also important. You can also include it in your ticketing system, which is also quite nice. But here it's also important to separate security incidents to a specific degree. So not just to have kind of all. You just mentioned security was a security incident, but then you break it down like it was malware, maybe ransomware, and so on. So you also, or maybe you even a device was stolen, and so on. So it's better also to do then any kind of analysis later if you have a little bit more generic incident setup. And then obviously also adapting your business continuity plan, as I said before. So by creating checklists and so on. Otherwise, again, it's already better to have a business continuity plan which is not tested than nothing. But again, in an emergency case, time is very precious, and everything should really work which is in there. And so you will actually not lose too much time. Then the technical controls in the preventive way will kind of, which is, as I said, baseline firewall antivirus, intrusion preventive system, multi-factor authentication, hardening IT infrastructure. Well, it's getting more and more implemented, which is nice. So this will definitely prevent from an easy entering, I would say. Detective, as I said, intrusion detective system, or the honeypots, which I mentioned already before. So, if an intruder tries to get into your network, hopefully you set it your honeypot in that way that they think your crown jewels are on there. And as I said, you would even see the intruder doing or setting up things, configuring his whatever he wants access to, and what kind of data he actually is looking at. So from as long as he's doing it, as I said, you have a better audit trail, and you could also actually respond to that attack. Then corrective controls, obviously patching this vulnerability. So if you have a server who is not using the latest patches, obviously do that. Obviously, also one corrective could also be reboot the system, because it's something didn't work as it should have on the system, or it really needs a reboot, and then it already function again properly. Or then quarantine and malware to do some the issue is definitely gone, and you still can do some follow-up, or then using your backups, as I said before. That would also be a corrective control. Then the last one, compliance controls. In preventive type, you can hopefully have hiring and termination policies where you can quickly also where employees also know what they have to do when they actually start or stop working. Hopefully you also have separation of duties. That is also very important. Here normally one of my favorite is always the apprentice who starts at the company, or let's say in a bank, and then during his first year he goes he can go through let's say 5 departments, and gathers a lot of also access controls, obviously, and at the end he has more than his superior, and then he can actually do some transaction by himself. So that won't be good. Then obviously also data classification. That's always also a topic I hear a lot. A lot of people are a bit afraid to actually classify their data. I think it will be more and more important also in future to have a clear data classification, because if we classified it from the beginning, it's also easier also to protect it, because then if we classify with a tag that it's or high confidential data, then obviously we could do already more. Well, we could um, protect it in a better way from the beginning, because the system would already know clearly that it's they highly classified data. So yeah, that's, I think. But I mean, there are also technical ways to do it. So some say also it's too much asked from an individual or user to actually classify his data. And sometimes also data actually changes from, well, highly classified to at the end even external. So that's also one thing which has to be considered. Then detective controls are obviously security audits, like reviewing of access rights. Like I said before, if nobody is looking at the apprenticeship's access rights, he will just keep it forever. So from time to time, well, somebody should really also validate that those access rights, if they're still used, and if not, obviously they have to, well, turned off or deactivated. Audit logs and unauthorized changes is also important. I mean, it's good if the system actually logs everything, but at the end of the day, somebody should at least look at those logs as well, especially also for developers or well, global admins, or who have really control of everything. So have a look at them as well, at least who logged on and what did they do. So that yeah, so you're sure that nobody's well, creating any kinds of funny things or things which shouldn't run on your network. Corrective controls, implementing obviously a business continuity plan would be really helpful, and using also an incident response plan, that would definitely help more in terms of controls. Okay, so well, yeah, the next two slides actually I talked a lot about how you could implement things and so on. So the next two slides are actually two slides which are well, more practical ways. So this is in in Azure actually. So what Microsoft is actually offering you if you use Microsoft 365. So from their side, what they're giving you, they have a kind of compliance manager tool, which you can obviously use. And what they do from their side is they're guaranteed, because obviously you're using a lot of technical infrastructure from Microsoft, you will also want to get some assurance that they're doing things right. So what are they doing? If you select ISO 27001, you can see what kind of controls they're using here, and I picked that too. Obviously, they have more, but you can see, well, obviously they have their control ID from the ISO 27001. You can see here, and it's also which is quite nice, also show you the supported GDPR article and others even. So that's quite nice if you also compare it to other standards. So here we have the control title secure logon processes, which they obviously score very high, but because it's also very well important control, obviously. So they implemented it, and the last test they did, which was done actually by a third-party independent auditor, was on the 31st of August 2018. And obviously they passed the result. So as we know that the certification has to be redone every 3 years, there should actually soon be a new test date, hopefully, by the third party independent auditor telling us they're still doing, or this technical well, secure logon process is still working as it should. And then obviously the test date will actually go up. So that's how it works. And below you can see the same, just for user registration, deregistration. Here, obviously, it's not that critical, so that compliance score is a little bit lower. But again, the identical third-party independent auditor did obviously the test, and they passed. So this is actually done by Microsoft. So you get already scoring by them, but you can actually improve your scoring. So by the tenant, you can see here also all the articles which are obviously important to you. So use of secret authentication information, or information access restriction, or secure logon procedures, which we already had done by technical part by Microsoft. If we take the last one, so we can also see that here we also have related controls even more. You can see HIPAA is also mentioned, or NIST. And you can then also assign this specific control to whoever is actually working your enterprise, and you can also manage though. You can also well, upload the documents if you want to. You can then also well, put an implementation date on it and it was implemented, or you can also mention it's not applicable for you, or well, it's not, let's say, well, it's you, or you have something else implemented and so on. So you can select here a couple of things. Then obviously you can do a test, and yeah, hopefully you will pass. But obviously test result you can also well, there are a couple of other things you can select, like not did not pass, or there's some hiccups or whatever. And once you did that, it will automatically actually calculate your compliance score. And yeah, so it's quite nice also to see on a technical side what how how high your compliance score is. And as I said before, if you also want to get a certification, this would already be a very good way to use, because you could actually, well, show it to the auditors and telling them if you're very well also documented um, how you set up the ISO 27001 framework. So I think this is also one thing I wanted to share, not just to talk about those things in a theoretical level, but also how things are actually done. So if you're using, well, this, as I said, is Microsoft 365 on Azure. So if you, but you can also use the big ones like AWS or Google Cloud, and they have similar things. I'm just saying, if you're considering going towards cloud solutions, maybe that's also one thing you could consider to see if you're compliant and using information security controls. Okay, having said that, I think I'm at the end. Hopefully it was well, very informative for you, and then I'm open actually for any questions.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I would just like to inform all of our attendees about the session is in sync with EC Council product, CCISO, that is Certified Chief Information Security Officer. It is an executive level program that covers what you should know about information security from an executive management point of view. It combines all the components required for the C level position, including audit management, governance, IS control, human capital management, strategic program development, and financial expertise. If you're interested to know more, kindly take part in the poll, which is going to be conducted now. Meanwhile, I also request you, if you have any questions to our speaker, do put it in the Q&A window. So let's just start with our Q&A. We have quite a lot of questions. What are information security controls and do they reduce cyber risk? Benefits from vendor neutral network security certification. So there are two actually.
Can you, do I also see them, or can you repeat them quickly?
Yes. What are information security controls and how do they reduce cyber risk? And the
Okay.
following question is benefits of vendor neutral network security certification. It's actually one question.
So the benefits, obviously, of the controls are that you, well, as we said in the beginning, in the definition, obviously you want to reduce any kind of at the end of risk or threats. I mean, if you, well, as I said before, if you just implement stuff, well, then and you're hoping that everybody is working as it should, and as I said, I can just do some security webinars and mobility, well, kind of awareness campaigns. But if I never check if the actually people actually are getting the message which I want to tell them, I mean that's what I'm saying. If you're not controlling it, it's well, maybe they're very clever and they get everything, but maybe they don't even be interested and don't care about it. And so you have to kind of also, well, check and control it. So therefore controls are, well, how can I say, read, well, you shouldn't sell them like it's, well, kind of mandatory, and if you don't do this it's very bad. But you have to actually increase kind that their awareness and also their interest towards that topic. But nevertheless, somehow, even also for your auditors, you need to show them that a couple of things in your company are actually working, and normally doing that by controls. And so they can also they will judge you and come with their controls, and so that you have to fulfill them. And if you can't show them that you're compliant towards whatever framework or laws or whatever you're using, so you will get a red flag, and that won't be very nice towards sea level or whoever. So therefore, again, control shouldn't just be a finger pointing towards someone, but at the end of the day, you want to have something well, to also to show and to see if it's working. So therefore, it's really good. But the good thing is also you can do a lot in a technical way, which I think is good. And so with that, a lot of well, I mean, in the old days, you had to do way more also manually and checking lists and so on. Nowadays, you can also really do a lot of things. You can also create a whole profiling, or I mean, also towards your network, you can well, you can basically also kind of like a videotape. You can scroll back a couple of weeks or hours, and you can see who was actually connected to what in your network. And even if you have the patient zero, you can actually see how patient zero infected the rest, and and how it spread out either to the world or in your internal network. That would actually have been nice if we had something similar in terms of the corona pandemic. So we would know well if somebody has it, how and us, and then you can really see how it broke out. But in terms of technical controls, I think this is really a good way, because nowadays things are so connected, and now with 5G and even Internet of Things, things will actually get more and more out of hand and quicker and faster, and so we will be more dependent on artificial intelligence, but obviously also on technical controls, because if we even would use as humans, you need hundreds of analysts to be as fast as a machine would be.
Okay, another question. What about the SolarWind attack? As per the attack theory, we must not update our softwares. That's a question from Ankit.
Well, that's I mean, that's a fair question, but nevertheless, I mean, I still think if problem is always obviously if I write a code or software, um, well, even a very secure one, let's say, tomorrow there are some new, I guess, vulnerabilities or threats or even things which I couldn't think of yesterday. So if somebody is actually creating a software, a couple of years later, there will be some attacks, and also, as I said before, also artificial intelligence, who can actually do things which nobody was intended that they can actually do an attack. So that's why regularly software updates are very important, because you otherwise you're not ready to the newer attacks. I mean, there will always be flaws. There will also always be bigger flaws, and that's unfortunate. So you really have to decide what bigger risk you have. But I mean, at the end, there will never be 100% security. So I mean, if the nation states want to hack a software, they will find a way. They have enough funds. You will find a way. And so therefore, I'm still strongly recommend you to update your software, do your analysis, and also hopefully you also have a rollback scenario if things are turning wrong. But again, even if in terms of if we had solar hack, I would still recommend to update your software.
Okay, another question, just a second. How do you decide which control assessment framework to use? Example, when to use CodeRed, NIST, etc.
That's a fair question. I guess it depends a little bit what your company is actually doing, first of all, and where you're located as well. I mean, if it's NIST normally is more used in the US, in that part of the world. You can see this a little bit. So it really, I mean, look. Normally, what I say is, I mean, look at also a little bit around you. What are your competitors doing in that field? or do you need it more as an international standard, or is it just a really specific standard? So this is well, it's really difficult to say. And sometimes I actually also recommended a lot of companies that they should just well, better picking out one framework, even if you don't certify it. I mean, you can also take ISO 27001 and not do a certification, but at least you have a guideline, and and I think that's better than instead of having nothing. But then again, really, you need to know well, do you want to, as I said before, you want to well, use it as a kind of additional well selling topic, like if you need the certification to actually be more advanced than your competitor maybe, or let's say if you're a cloud provider, you definitely need something also in that area. So it really depends a bit what you're doing.
Yes, the next one is from Athoja. How do you protect data in cloud against malware and attack?
Well, so first of all, I hope that your cloud provider has a certain security baseline. That's my first thing. And then it really depends a little bit, obviously, how you're set up. I mean, is it the one man show? Is it just with somebody looking after well, the IT? Is it somebody looking after all the well, cloud configuration your company's actually using? So there's obviously a lot of things, but I mean, if you're using the bigger ones, well, it's always possible that they also get hacked, obviously, but I would say they have also employees who are doing nothing else than securizing their whole infrastructure. So I guess you will be better off doing it by them instead of somebody who is doing it maybe just from time to time, and that you don't even feel safe if if he or she can do a proper backup. So that depends. I mean, and then that's as you said. I mean, how can you be sure that no malware is actually uploaded? You have to do really some good house cleaning rules in your whole network. I mean, people have to know what they're allowed to upload. Um, then you have to restrict access and so on. So this is not just a recipe I can just give you quickly and tell you you have to do this and then everything is secure. So there are more things which you have to keep, well, I guess, well, in your on your radar. So it's also very important to keep your well, antivirus and firewall up to date. So again, it's really also important that you have somebody who understands IT security. I think if you don't have that, then I mean the cloud provider can actually sell you everything or nothing. Depends a bit if he's a good salesperson. So and then obviously also train your employees so that they also know what they're doing. But it can always happen, and it's good to have kind of also segmentation. I mean, if at least if something happens, just one part of your network is actually either crashed or hit by an incident, that helps as well. But I mean, there are several possible setups, and as I said, there will never be 100% of security. In the worst case, it can hit everybody.
Okay, another question is what is the typical structure for a cyber risk department, including roles and responsibilities?
Well, this is a difficult question if I don't know how big actually the company is. But let's say, well, I take a medium-sized company. Uh, well, obviously you have a head of the department, and then it depends obviously also or IT department. Then obviously you have a compliance team, which or even an IT compliance team. Well, IT operation normally, IT development, well, hopefully also security team. So I'm not saying that this is the only way you can actually set up a company, but that's what I often saw. And then from there you can actually split it down. Then it really depends how big as I said, the company is. I mean, you can have two developers or 100. That's difficult to say. You can also have a small security team or a big one. It really also it's the nature also of what you're actually also selling and yeah, what kind of data you have to protect. So if your data is, well, let's say, anyhow quite public, um, then yeah, well, we still have to protect it. But then I would say the security level will be, I guess, be a little bit lower instead of if you have your bank and yeah, nobody should know how much money actually your clients have on their account. So it really depends a bit on that structure. So it's that's why it's a tricky question. It's not that easy answer. It really depends on the size and then the function of the company.
Okay, the last question is again from Atuja. What security control measures are required when you are carrying out risk assessment and protection of a corporate information?
Uh, well, can you repeat that again? I didn't get the first one.
Yes. What security control measures are required when you're carrying out a risk assessments and protection of corporate information?
Well, as I said, if you carry out a risk assessment and you have never done it before and you don't know what kind of controls you want to have, it's the best way to actually also at least look at any kind of frameworks which could actually fit in your company. So the question which was asked before, which standard should you use? Again, just also here, well, let's also get some facts about maybe also your competitors. What are they doing? Would that be maybe something similar? Maybe also have some friends in other security departments. So that's always a good thing to also know, because once you started to risk analyze it, you also want to hold well, once you find the risk, it's also nice if you can also well mitigate it through a control. So that's why it's also important to also know already a couple of controls which are out there. So that's a bit it. So it's a bit play in between each other. I mean, there are well, and then you can also do, as I said before, if you're very technical or your well main thing is actually you're developing any kinds of platforms or whatever. I guess then it will be more relevant also to do more penetration testing external, and they will then also tell you actually what they're exactly looking at. And so basically they're also looking at any kinds of controls or standards which they will actually look if you're on that level. And yeah, normally what you get out of it is a kind of a gap analysis where you are at the moment. And then obviously then the best thing is, if you really want to increase, is to have something, as I said before, any kind of framework, so you can actually increase. So you have really also a baseline where you know, okay, well, if I implement this and this and this, I will actually go up, and maybe I can even get a certification.
I think, Alex, that's it with the questions. We have no more questions. I would again like to thank you for such an enlightening session. I think our audience was also quite interested, and that's why so many questions for you. Thank you so much. And for all our attendees, we will be sending across a survey form for you tomorrow. Thank you, and you may now disconnect your lines.
Thank you.
Bye, Alex. See you.
Bye.